and see what that opens up. So
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
So thanks for meeting with me. I'm so excited.
my pleasure.
Yeah. And like I feel the recording, it's like we've been talking for like 45 minutes. But now it's like, okay, let's talk about working together, which I absolutely loved working with you, by the way, because interestingly enough, before we started working together, actually when we started contemplating that, I didn't actually um I was like just happy that we were going to explore working together. And I was like, oh, working with friends was something that I was just starting to do really, because in the
Mm.
past that wasn't something I did as much. And one thing that I learned, because a few months before working with you, I worked with a friend from university as well. And I saw how powerful that was because I had more context of where that person came from.
Mm.
And
Mm.
as silly as this might sound, I'm like, I know your mom, and I find that like it brought like a whole, because when I work with people, like I know that I'm working with a whole unit,
Yeah.
because the work we do will impact, your spouse, your friends. But I was like, I was often thinking about your mom and your history. And I was like, it really made me all the more excited to work with you. So um, I'm curious to know what it was like for you initially. Like, what were your thoughts when we started working together? Maybe what's what made you consider working with me? What hesitations did you have?
I think, you're mentioning the fact that working with friends was something different. I think that was definitely something that I contemplated where I was like, this is someone I know, I've been to university with them, like they know me in a in a different way than just like me randomly searching for a coach would have, provided. But I think that was also a reason why um it felt right, because I was like, well, this person does know me.
Mm,
And they also they know me, but they also see me probably very differently than I see myself. And so it felt safer, and I was somebody that was very I guess not opposed to the idea of being coached, but I was like, oh, I can do it all on my own. And I think I reached a point where I needed that guidance, and I needed and I guess it felt safe for me to pick someone that I knew. And also, like, your demeanor, you're friendly, you're nice, you're open, you're positive. I am so hard on myself, and I'm so, and I've always been that way. And it was kind of nice to be presented with a gentle yet, encouraging way of doing things. And so it felt right. The timing felt right, I think. And I also feel that it just allowed me that opening that I was feeling to be open to the idea of being coached. I think working with you helped crack that open more.
mhm.
Um, so yeah.
That's so interesting, particularly the safety part, because I do think, leading up to working with a coach, often it's an idea that's either been on your mind, and obviously your partner was building like a whole company around coaching, and
Yeah.
we had conversations like together, and um, it's often like a seed that's been planted, that's like been nourished, but then taking that step, I feel that's often where the biggest transformation happens, like already being like, I'm going to do this, because it's one, you're investing in yourself, but you're also declaring like, I'm going to make a change.
Yeah.
And it can be scary because there's this like letting go of, I feel it's like such like a line drawn in the sand. It's like, who I've been up until this point is going to change.
Mhm.
And so choosing a coach that you feel like, I always tell people this, like, I'm like, find the coach that works for you. And you might work with different coaches in your life, and what you said too, of like, we're kind of the generation that we're supposed to do it on our own. And I also feel that we're the generation where we haven't received as much external support. And it's so necessary. I mean, obviously I'm biased because I am a coach, but working with coaches, I'm like, when have I had the best results in my life? It's often when I work with a coach that
Yeah.
is taking a stand for me, but also keeping me focused. And it's like, I feel that it's important to have a coach that like you trust, and that you feel just maybe a little bit nervous about, like when you go on a call, like you want to show up, be like, okay, I did what I had to do, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I remember one of our first conversations, there was you had brought up something around like, you know, I don't want something too woo woo.
Yes. That's still a thing for me. And I have to ask myself why that's uncomfortable, right? But now I ask myself those questions. So,
And what do you feel came up around that? Because I have some thoughts on that.
well, I think part of that is like, I don't know. I think it's still a thing. You know what I mean? Like I was in Paris and I was looking at the twinkling Eiffel Tower,
Oh
and I
yeah,
was
so
like,
beautiful.
I'm like, it's cheesy. But it's like, who cares if it's cheesy? It's beautiful and it's amazing. And like, everyone wants to take photos of it. And whoever thought about adding lights to that thing was so smart. And I think it's okay to lean into those things. And I had to, it kind of goes back to like safety and being hard on yourself. It's like, what have I gained from being so rigid and hard on myself,
Mm,
that leaning into something that's woo woo, or a bit more like, feely, touchy feely and hippy dippy, like whatever adjectives you want to string together. Like maybe I stand to gain from a different approach, right? I stand to open up to something different. I don't think that being rigid and is going to help me grow and kind of move with the punches in life, right? And so I feel differently about it. I still have that kind of like gut reaction when I see things that I think are a little bit, but then now I'm like, oh, stop. Why? Like you've had good experiences doing stuff that you've thought was like very so
uh,
ask yourself why you feel that way. And often it's like, yeah, like that discomfort is not there's something deeper, right?
mhm.
Yeah.
Can
So
I
I
share
don't.
something about that with you?
Yeah, sure.
I remember laughing when you said that, and then I feel as our work went forward, I feel we were like tapping into that side of
Mm,
you,
mm,
and that was, I feel, was part of the process of you like really stepping into yourself as an artist. And
yes.
we also had some conversations about your heritage and like bringing that into like your
Mhm,
life. And I see that, like, I wonder if there's something there for you, because I feel there's like so much power in like who
mm,
you are, and
mhm,
like,
mhm.
without sounding too woo woo, but like this magic in you
Yeah.
that like makes people uncomfortable when you step out of the like, the square box that North American culture that you were like brought up in, like
Mhm,
kind of wants you to be. But I feel part of your work and where you're at, or at least this is my point of view, it has been like, actually, I'm not a freaking square. You know, I am this unique human being, and also making unique creations. So, and even with your art, so maybe we can talk a little bit about what we focused on, because
yeah.
we were talking about ritual objects, and what it was connecting to, things that were maybe part of the spiritual world in a certain way. So
I know.
let's talk a little bit about, which I love. So this is so perfect, because often, I feel that still, even with me, things that I'm like when I'm alone in secret, I'm like, this totally makes sense for me. But now how do I present this into the world? Because it's like so many people will be like, she's wild. But I have to understand that that's also who I am. So, and I'm okay. So let's talk a little bit about what we focused on and what you're hoping to get out of it, and maybe what you did get out of it.
Okay. So I think I went into this thinking like, oh, I'm just gonna have this like clear expectation and like, bullet points of all the things that I have to tick off my list to achieve X, whatever X was, because it's different now.
Mhm.
Um, but I think what I ended up getting out of it was an experience of stepping into who I am as a person and allowing
Mm,
myself the space to do that. No one's allowed me to do that in my
mm,
life. So
mm,
it was fun because I am that person. Like I am this person that I've kind of been like I haven't let that person I think like out. I've tried to fit myself into different boxes of what's expected of me or what I think is expected of me. And
Mm,
it hasn't yielded, the bounty that I thought it was going to, right? But the moment that I allowed myself to kind of let that person out, or like, step into the real person or discover who that was, because that's basically what I did with you. I feel like I just kept trying to tap back into who that person is and where I'm going, and also seeing value in that,
mm,
right? And I think in the end, yeah, I've just become a more confident person in my own self, and like I am more myself, more in touch with who I am, than I ever have been. And and I
mm,
allowed myself that space with you to discover that. And my objectives, my business objectives are different, than when I first met with you, right? Like,
mhm,
but the idea of ritual objects, the idea of connecting to my heritage have become even more central to what I'm doing, because I've this body of work that I want to create as an artist, and it is very much an exploration of my culture and who I am, and the erasure of that I had to kind of, I thought I had to do to fit in here and to be part
mm,
of this culture, and so it it just allowed me to say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to focus on that. That is who I am. And in so doing that, and in so pursuing my life like out loud as an artist and saying that out loud,
mm,
I will get closer to me, you know?
mm.
Yeah.
Wow, I love that.
No.
Can you share a little bit about, your heritage and also the art that you're creating?
So I was born in Nicaragua during like a pretty like tumultuous like time of like kind of civil unrest. And I moved here with my mom, who's a single mom. And into another culture that was also kind of going through their own cultural stuff about identity. And
Mm,
my mom and I remember her telling me that if I wanted to fit in here, and if we wanted for it to be easy, we had to kind of forego like speaking Spanish in public. And
mm,
it was hard for us to find even like the ingredients that we would normally find, to make the food that we would eat back home, because it wasn't popular. So we
mm,
just kind of ate the way people eat here. And so I existed in two worlds. Like I would go back home to see my grandparents in Nicaragua, and that was when I could be all of that, and that was accessible to me. And when
mhm,
I was here in Montreal, that just wasn't the world. Like that world didn't exist. But what I came to realize was that it didn't matter how hard I tried to be part of this, I was never going to actually ever be 100% like, you know, a square peg into a square hole. I was always going to have
mm,
problems, always. And it didn't matter how many times I tried to jam myself in there, it just wasn't quite right. But in the exploration that you and I did, in the work that you and I did, I started to like build. I've always built stuff that's very reminiscent of where I'm from, like the shapes, the sculptural work, the ideas around kind of death and life and stuff like that, which is very central to kind of, I guess, how we like our adaptation to religion, our views of nature and stuff like that, and stuff that I grew up with. And now I'm started to build these very large kind of vessels that are kind of almost like fertility vessels. And I'm using techniques that are techniques that artists, use in Nicaragua. I mean, also Nicaragua has got a lot of Mesoamerican style pottery, and there's actually a history of that. Um, that that we have a strong history of it actually. And so I
mm,
felt like this was maybe a way for me to go back to my roots, um with because even when I go back now I'm not Nicaraguan enough. Like now I have a little bit of a French
right.
accent when I speak Spanish. Now it's like there's just no place except for the place that I
Mm,
make for myself. And so in this way I can explore my roots and my heritage, by building new things that are in
Mm.
echoes of old traditions, but, you know, with my take on them. And so I'm building these giant, large scale vases. Um, they're in a fertility style. And my goal is to build one for every year that I've been alive. And it's kind of,
Wow.
yeah, just to harken back to like the women in my life, the experiences that I've had. And so they take a long time to make. It's going to take me a long time to finish it.
Mm.
But I feel like, I don't know, it's an exploration that I feel is a journey that I want to go on, and it brings me closer in a gentler way. And it's not about trying to fit in; it's about trying to open up. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. And obviously, since I've known you for several years, I've also been able to witness like the evolution of your career path. You know, just to give some context, like we were just chatting even before we started recording about our days at McGill, you know, trying to stay awake in Leacock 132 during like psych classes. And I'm like, you were such my, honestly, there's several classes I'm like, I would show up because I knew you'd be there. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have made it. But I think both you and I, you know, I entered psychology thinking I would go into law school after,
Hmm.
and I think you did as well.
Hmm.
And I mean, very early on into my first semester, I was like, this is not like law won't be for me. And I remember being in a like a political science class, and I was like, oh, because a lot of people would do like a psych degree to get into law school. Anyway, but you and I
I
were both kind of
remember.
on that trajectory. And I think we both also started creating our own paths, you know,
Hmm.
after you did a fine arts degree and,
Yeah.
you know, did all sorts of things that I think were part of like trying to follow the traditional path, but eventually being like, that's not who
No.
you are, right?
No.
And that's what I
Exactly.
find is so beautiful. What you're one, you're such a talented artist, and there's something you shared in one of our conversations about like creating a matriarchy, and a lot of my work has like the motherhood influence and what you just shared with your fertility vessels. So I want to like just touch on that a little bit about what that means to you and what do you mean by these fertility vessels in yeah.
So traditional, like very old, like and actually in many, I think, cultures, you'll see like different versions of fertility vessels, like uncovered in like archaeological digs and stuff like that. And usually like they're big bellied, um, kind of sculptural figurines or pots and stuff like that. And to me, I guess
Mm,
I just really, part of anything, I think part of any career or anything, you have to really like the process, you have to really like what you're doing, or at least partially on a day-to-day basis. And I love making these things. I love making them. They're huge, they're big and body and large, but also slender and like delicate in the same way, much like women are.
mm-hmm.
And what the vessels can carry, what you can put into them, what you can pour out of them, right? And so I feel like they're very, I mean, we are so flexible and so enduring, and women are incredible in some ways, right? And like we carry children, we take care of children, we take care of our mothers, we take care of our sisters. And so for me, and at least my family, the women have been, I think, the backbone of everything.
Mm,
And so it's also like a tribute to them. I have a wall in my house of like framed photos of like I think at least up to my great great grandmother, just like photographs of them.
wow.
And I think about it, like how hard it must have been for them to just keep pushing forward. And I want to wait, these vessels take up space, and that's part of it. I just want them to take up space.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know what the last one will look like. I have all these ideas of what the different ones will look like, but it's definitely like um it's about being woman. It's about carrying that forward, or not, or like, the choices we have of to be a mother, to not be a mother, to do this, to not do that. But yeah, it's kind of a little, it definitely touches on the idea of matriarchy and like continuing family and fostering community and that type of thing.
Wow. And I feel that's so representative of women, right? And also you know, like take up our space. I think as women we're told to like, don't take up too much space, don't talk too loud, you know, be as thin as possible or whatever. But that's
Mhm.
not like who we are. We are
Not at
meant to
all.
take up space. We're meant to continuously transform and, you know, to move and evolve. And so I love that. And I think that's something with art as well, is that it always represents so much more. And that's one of the reasons that I loved your work and finding out more about it also through our work together of like,
Mhm.
there's always something that is beyond what you see. And I feel there's something that, you know, art often makes you feel something, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's because of all the feeling you're putting into it. So it's really cool to see how, I don't know, I'm excited. I didn't know this was going to be like a series.
Yeah.
So we worked together like about a year ago. What do you think, you know, is different, or what have you taken from our work together that is influencing where you're at now, and that you might influence where you're going, that you may not have received otherwise had we not worked together?
I think the other thing that was apart from the woo woo thing that we mentioned before, like the things, I think I knew this, but I think with you, I kind of, it was cemented for me that like the things that you get stuck on are kind of like important things to dig at, um, realizing what's underneath that. But the other thing that I feel I've brought with me and what I'm doing is the value,
Mm,
right? Like the value of things. And um in some ways at that time we were talking about pricing because I was like, oh, I want to sell stuff and da, 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 da. But I think what I ended up getting out of it, it wasn't so much like a numerical number, but understanding that what I'm doing has a value to it, and like
mm,
I have to see that and allow for that and not be ashamed of that,
mm,
even if you get pushback, which you always will. But then those people aren't the people that I'm making that for,
mm,
and my people are out there, and the people that will love what I do are out there. And it's not necessarily every single person in my family or my friends for that matter. Um, and so I think working with you allowed me to
mm,
um, dare to insert myself and make it about me. Um, dare to, attach a value to it that I would never have thought it deserved. So I think working with you, yeah, it definitely allowed me to dare to go there, to do that, to
mm.
push myself. And I don't think so much about it. I just kind of do it now. So I'm not waffling in the same way internally as I would have in the past.
Well, that's so big, because I remember those conversations where it was like, you know, I think a part of our work was also like identifying like, where do you want to position yourself? What kind of artist you want
Yeah.
to be? And a lot of that comes through looking at what are you naturally interested in, and, you know, what do you put, and looking at your process and looking at, you know, the work that you do, not just like linearly, but seeing everything that is
Yes.
contributing to it.
Yeah.
And definitely there's this like undervaluing conversation with so many women have, you know, and I mean, I still have to work through that. And, oh my gosh, why are we undervaluing ourselves? But that's because that's often how we've been kind of trained, right? And we're
Yeah.
like pushing that. And it starts by taking a stand. We're like, I value this. Like, if you don't value what you do, then most people won't, right? But it, I think it allowed you to own that a bit more of like who you're for, who you're not for,
Yeah.
and more importantly, being you seeing the importance of the work that you do.
Mhm. I agree. And it's been it's obviously like an ongoing thing, right? It's not something that'll go away. Um, but it's and as I see more women in my milieu doing it, I realize like, oh, they're daring. You know what I mean? Like nothing says I
Mm,
can't. You know what I mean? Why do I
no, yeah.
feel like I and speaking of women in my past, like I think about, my grandmother, I think about how that kind of the times that she would react negatively to things, I think it's because she wasn't allowed to dare. She wasn't allowed to, be
Hmm.
that person. And I just didn't, you know, yeah, I think stepping into myself and allowing me to dare has made me just like a generally more content person, just generally happier. which is not a bad thing, right? It's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's so important.
Just, I
I
have
mean,
bad days like everybody else, but now I'm just like, but I'm happy with me, I'm good. I'm doing okay.
yeah. I mean, I often think, and we did talk about your grandmother a few times, and just I think about mine a lot, and I'm like, man, she would just kick some ass if she was alive right now.
Yeah, exactly.
But I
Right.
mean, just think about like just 1-2 generations ago, like my grandma didn't have a choice to be home with her 5 kids, and stay. My grandfather was an alcoholic,
Yeah.
war vet, but she didn't have the rights that we did. And women generations like have been ingrained, like it just wasn't safe to dare. Like you literally like might die or have your children taken away from you because your husband owned them, or you had to marry because you couldn't open. Like there's just so many things that we haven't experienced, that it's like, oh, it's our duty to dare.
Yeah.
For them in their honor, right? And like we still have things to work through because there's like generational conditioning that like has been passed on of like, don't dare because it's not safe. At the beginning of our conversations, like talking about safety, like we have to create like a safe space to dare.
Yes.
And also recognize that like it's safe, the safest that it's ever been. Like the worst that can happen might be, actually one exercise I had to do, I actually shared this in a group recently, was like to write your worst review.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you said, you're often your worst critic. And I did this with you because this was actually inspired by a designer who writes his best review, the review he wants to live into. And I was like, you know what, with Helen, let's just flip that around, since she's already thinking about the worst case. So let's get it out of the way. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. But I also don't remember that. Do you know what I mean? I remember doing it and being like, oh God. But then feeling like, okay, if this is the worst that I'm gonna get, then I mean, how bad is it going to be? Like, and honestly, I think if I look back now with the perspective that I have now, I think the worst things that I feel are the regrets of not daring. That is, and I carry them with me, kind of like little reminders, that is, hate is going to hate. People are always going to have comments. But in reality, I think that I have to I'm doing it for my people, and I'm doing it for me, and it's okay to do it for me. And I think that was another thing that I picked up through the course of our time working together, is that it's a lot about, it's okay. It's okay if I'm doing it for me. It's okay to be selfish, you know. So,
Right. Yeah. Because it's often like there's something you said before we started recording about you want a place to play, which is your studio, and one of my favorite quotes from Daniel Priestley, who's an entrepreneur, is that your best ideas will come out to play, not work.
Yeah.
And often like our greatest work does come from that. Doesn't mean there aren't challenges, because playing a good game often has challenges. Like that's what makes us want to play. If it's too easy, we'll be bored. But yeah, and often we are our greatest critics, and sometimes just getting it out of the way is like, oh, like it's not going to be so bad. And often we're afraid of being criticized by those who our work isn't for. Right. And it's like, oh, this isn't even for them. Like most of the people that give me pushback on coaching have never worked with a coach. So I'm like, why would I listen to them?
I know,
right?
it's very funny. It's funny. Like I think one of the best compliments I got was I did a workshop, because now that I'm running the studio that I'm in, I'm like, I have to learn how to fix my kiln and all this stuff. So I did a kiln workshop. I don't know this person at all. The one that was holding the workshop, he's been around in the Chinese community here for like 40 years. Like he's just like the guy that knows all the technical stuff. And I'm taking out this huge piece from the Visual Arts Center where I'd finished a class. And he's like, is that yours? And I was like, yeah. And I took it out from the back because he had all his tools leaning up against it. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, wow, that's amazing. Like, I don't know this person at all. And I was like, wow, that's great. Like, I'm like, I didn't ask for a compliment. I didn't put it out there. I didn't like plaster, my social media with it. It was just a genuine comment. And I was like, yeah, this is the kind of person that I want appreciating my work. Someone that's been in the field for like 40 years and has fixed countless of artists' stuff around the city. Like that's like, what do I care if my and twice removed is like, oh, what are you doing with your time?
Right.
It's not for them, but it's hard to sometimes not get stuck in that kind of mindset. for sure.
Yes, it's
So,
often one of the biggest things we have to work through.
mhm, mhm.
So where can people find out more about your work?
Well, as of now, because I am in the studio a lot and not building my website as I should be, they can follow me on Instagram. So they can follow me at Instagram at Harcey, Harcey, and then anything that will happen will be there. And from there, you can find the rest of my stuff. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, I absolutely loved working with you, and I'm just like so excited. Like I love following your journey. Also, I get to travel and get some snippets of Tofino when you're out there.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful that we had this conversation, and I'm just excited for seeing more of your creations.
Me too. And I thank you for letting me talk about myself in this way. I enjoy it, and it's nice to catch up and after a whole year, of
I
working
know.
together. So yeah,
Isn't that wild?
I
I
know.
love you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oops. Like, how do I stop recording?